Okay, so we've got a really interesting pile of stuff here, all about awards in the spirits industry. Looks like we're going to try to figure out what actually makes an award meaningful these days, at least according to all this.
Yeah, that's the idea. I mean, for a long time, the way things worked is, you had these competitions judged by the pros, the master distillers, the brand ambassadors, like the real insiders.
Right, people who really know their stuff. But, and this is something these sources point out, there's this potential for, I don't know, hidden bias, I guess you could call it, baked into that whole setup.
Hmm.
Even if you've got the most knowledgeable judges in the world, they're still going to have preferences, right? Maybe they're partial to a certain distillery or a particular style of spirit, or even just a brand they happen to have a connection with.
Exactly. It's not necessarily intentional.
Right, it's not about anyone being deliberately unfair. It's just human nature to have these leanings. So the big question all this raises, and this is something these sources really dig into, is whether an award from the industry actually translates into consumers trusting a brand and ultimately buying more of their product. Do those two things actually line up?
Yeah, that's the crux of it. Does all this industry recognition actually mean anything to the average person walking into a store and looking for something to drink?
Okay, so that leads us to this really interesting alternative that keeps popping up in these sources.
Hmm.
Consumer-judged competitions. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? Instead of a panel of experts, you let everyday drinkers decide what's good.
That's the gist of it. Yeah, it's like a complete flip of the script.
Right, a total 180.
Hmm.
So our mission here, it seems, is to try and unpack this whole idea.
Hmm.
Why are these sources saying that consumer opinions are becoming so crucial for spirits brands? And how is all of this changing the industry?
That's what we're here to figure out.
All right, let's dive in. So first things first, what's the main problem with just sticking with these traditional awards, the ones judged by the industry folks?
Well, the main issue that these sources keep coming back to is this disconnect between what the pros value and what the average consumer is looking for in a drink. The awards might be going to spirits that are technically brilliant, perfect examples of their style, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be the most enjoyable for someone just wanting a nice drink.
Right. Like someone who just wants something tasty might not care as much about all the subtle nuances that a master distiller is trained to pick up on. And it seems like these sources are saying that consumers are getting more and more skeptical of these traditional awards anyway. What's driving that shift?
It seems like authenticity is a huge thing for consumers these days, and it makes sense, right? They're bombarded with marketing all the time, so they're understandably wary of anything that feels like it's just hype or an insider's game.
Okay, so they're more likely to trust something that feels genuine.
Exactly. If they don't believe in the system behind the awards, then even a shiny gold medal might not mean much when it comes to influencing their choices at the store, which of course weakens the whole marketing power of those awards.
Right, it's like if you don't trust the source of the information, then the information itself is worthless. And one of these sources mentions this thing called the SIP Awards. What's that all about?
Well, the idea there is to try and eliminate any of that potential bias we were talking about. The judges are evaluating the spirits purely on what's in the glass, the taste, the aroma, the overall quality, without knowing anything about the brand, the price point, or who made it. It really puts everything on an even playing field and forces them to just focus on the spirit itself.
So no fancy labels or reputations to sway their opinion. It's all about whether the liquid actually lives up to the hype. That sounds pretty fair. And these sources also talk about the financial implications of this whole disconnect between what the industry likes and what consumers actually want.
Yeah, that's a big point. Think about it. Brands spend a lot of money and time entering these traditional competitions, and then they spend even more promoting their wins, right? But if those wins don't translate to consumers actually changing their buying habits, then it's not really money well spent.
Right. They're not getting a return on their investment.
Exactly. It becomes this kind of vicious cycle where a brand might be celebrating an award, but at the end of the day, it's not actually moving the needle in terms of sales because it doesn't connect with the people actually buying the product. So yeah, it's a big risk for these companies. They could be pouring resources into awards that ultimately don't actually resonate with their target audience.
Okay, so let's flip things around and talk about what one of these sources calls the power of consumer opinions. What is it about consumer feedback that makes it so valuable?
Well, these sources make the case that consumer validation offers a totally different kind of market insight. It's not just about the technical aspects of the spirit, it's about how people actually experience it and what they actually like. When you gather feedback from a really wide range of consumers, you start to see patterns emerge that you might not have picked up on otherwise.
Okay, so it's like crowdsourcing market research.
Exactly. And those insights can be incredibly valuable. Like, you might discover that a certain demographic is really drawn to a particular aspect of your spirit, or you might find unexpected selling points that you hadn't even considered, or even completely new ways to position your product based on how consumers perceive it.
It's like you're getting this direct line to what people actually want.
Right. And that kind of feedback can inform everything from your packaging and marketing to your whole distribution strategy.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like, why guess when you can just ask? And these sources also talk about this thing called social proof. What's that all about?
Well, the idea is that we're more likely to trust a recommendation if it comes from someone we perceive as being similar to ourselves. So if you see that a bunch of everyday people, not industry insiders, have tried a particular spirit and liked it, you're more inclined to give it a shot yourself. It feels more authentic, more trustworthy.
It's like, I'm more likely to trust a restaurant recommendation from a friend than I am a review from some food critic I've never met.
Exactly. And the criteria that consumers use to judge a spirit are totally different from what the professionals are looking at. The pros are focused on technical perfection, adherence to style guidelines, all that stuff. But for consumers, it often boils down to something much simpler. Do I like the taste? Is it something I can see myself drinking again? And most importantly, would I actually spend my money on this? So it really cuts to the heart of what matters most to a business. Will people actually buy this?
It tells you whether people are actually putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak.
Yeah.
And how does all of this translate into a competitive advantage for a brand, especially when they're trying to stand out in a crowded store?
Well, imagine you're walking down the liquor aisle and you see two bottles of, say, bourbon. They're both around the same price, but one of them has a sticker that says it won a gold medal at some big industry competition, and the other one has a sticker that says it was voted the best bourbon by a panel of everyday consumers. Which one are you more likely to grab?
Probably the one that the regular people picked.
Right. And that's the power of consumer validation. It creates trust, and it makes people feel more confident about their choices even before they've tried the product. It lowers that barrier to entry and makes them more likely to take a chance on something new.
So it's not just about winning any old award, it's about winning the right kind of award, one that actually means something to your target audience. Okay, so now let's talk about how all of this fits into the bigger picture of building a brand. One of these sources talks about building brand credibility authentically. How does that work?
Well, in today's market, having some kind of third-party validation is crucial. It's what builds trust, especially when there are so many brands competing for attention. But the source of that validation really matters. Consumers are savvy, and they can spot a marketing gimmick a mile away. So these consumer-judged awards offer something different. They represent a kind of authentic, unbiased recognition that's becoming increasingly important for brands that want to connect with their audience on a genuine level.
Okay, so it's not just about hype, it's about substance.
Exactly. It's about showing that your product is actually good, not just telling people it is. And that credibility extends beyond just the consumer. These sources suggest that it can also give brands a leg up when dealing with distributors and retailers.
Oh, how so?
Well, think about it from their perspective. Distributors and retailers want to carry products that are going to sell, right? So when a brand can show that their product has already been vetted and approved by actual consumers, the very people who are going to be buying from those stores and restaurants, it gives them a lot more confidence. It's basically proof that there's a demand for the product.
So it's like taking some of the risk out of the equation for them.
Exactly. And that can make a huge difference when you're trying to get your product on shelves or featured in promotions, or even just secure those initial distribution agreements, especially for smaller brands or brands that are just starting out.
Right. The ones that might not have the same marketing muscle as the big players.
Mm-hmm.
So these consumer awards can help level the playing field a bit. And how does all this transparency, the fact that it's everyday people doing the judging, play into this?
Well, it goes back to that idea of authenticity that we were talking about earlier. Consumers are more likely to trust a product if they know that it's been evaluated by people like them, people who aren't industry insiders. It just feels more real, more relatable. And these sources also emphasize the importance of digital marketing in amplifying all of these benefits.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. How so?
Think about it. Consumer validation provides brands with tons of great content for social media, email campaigns, their websites, all that stuff. A quote from a real person who loves your product is way more effective than just another generic ad. And when you combine that kind of authentic content with the reach and targeting capabilities of digital marketing, it can be a really powerful tool for driving sales.
It's about leveraging the power of word of mouth, but on a much larger scale.
Exactly. It's like word of mouth on steroids.
Okay, so we've talked about the limitations of traditional awards, and we've explored the power of consumer opinions. Now, let's get practical. How do brands actually translate all of this into real business results?
One of these sources has a whole chapter dedicated to this, and they stress the importance of being strategic about how you promote your wins. It's not enough to just stick a sticker on your bottle and call it a day. You need to be shouting it from the rooftops.
Literally.
Well, maybe not literally, but you get the idea. You need to make sure that consumer validation is front and center in all of your marketing efforts. Put it on your packaging, feature it in your point of sale displays, highlight it on social media, integrate it into your website, even mention it in your sales pitches to distributors and retailers.
So it's about creating this consistent message that reinforces the idea that your product has been vetted and approved by the people who matter most, the consumers. And that validation can even have an impact on your pricing, right?
Absolutely. Consumers are often willing to pay more for a product if they believe that it's high quality, and consumer validation can really help to cement that perception.
It's like a seal of approval from the people you trust.
Exactly. And that's especially important for craft and premium brands, where maintaining a higher price point is crucial for their business model. And as we touched on earlier, this all ties back to how those consumer awards can really strengthen your relationships with distributors and retailers.
Right, because at the end of the day, they just want to sell products.
Right. Exactly. And when a brand can show them that their product has already proven itself in the marketplace, that it's something that consumers are actually excited about, it makes their job a lot easier. It reduces their risk and makes them much more likely to give your product a chance.
So it's like a win-win for everyone involved.
Exactly. And beyond the immediate sales boost, these sources also highlight the value of the direct feedback that brands receive through these competitions.
Oh, right, because you're getting actual opinions from your target audience.
Exactly. It's a goldmine of insights that you can use to refine your product, your marketing, your whole strategy. You can find out what people love about your product, what they're not so crazy about, and use that information to make improvements. It creates this really valuable feedback loop that helps you stay ahead of the curve and keep your customers happy.
So it's not just about winning an award, it's about using that win as a springboard for continuous improvement.
Exactly. It's about making your product the best it can be and making sure that it's something that people are actually going to enjoy and come back for again and again.
So the big takeaway here is that the spirits industry is changing. The old way of doing things, where industry recognition was the be-all and end-all, just doesn't cut it anymore.
That seems to be the consensus among these sources. They argue that consumer validation is becoming the most important factor in the marketplace. And the brands that are going to thrive in the future are the ones that understand that and prioritize authentic connections with their audience. They're the ones that are going to build real, lasting brands.
Brands that people trust and want to support. So to wrap things up, it seems like these sources are making a pretty strong case for the power of consumer validation in the spirits industry. They suggest that it's a more direct, more authentic, and ultimately more effective way to build brand credibility and drive sales, especially compared to just relying on those traditional industry awards.
Yeah, that's the gist of it.
Which brings us to a question for you, our listener. In a world where we're constantly bombarded with information and marketing messages, how can businesses earn and maintain the trust of their audience? What role does this kind of genuine consumer feedback play in that process?
Good question.
It's something to think about, isn't it? And maybe, just maybe, these insights in the world of spirits can be applied to other industries as well. Anywhere where there might be a gap between what the experts think and what actually resonates with the people who are ultimately buying the products. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.